So we're in a series called Dharma for Difficult Times. And I've been told that the title of the talk I'm going to give tonight is The Root of the Problem. Actually, I didn't know that. The root of the problem. So what's the problem? Is it a virus that's making some people very sick? Is it the fact that to stop the virus spreading, we've had to give up all sorts of freedoms and all the things we do to entertain ourselves, and we've not been able to see friends and family, and so on? Those might be part of the problem, or symptoms of the problem, but the problem I'm referring to is deeper and more general than that, and it's what Buddhists call dukkha. And dukkha covers a whole range of things, from at one extreme, actual physical pain and suffering, through mental and emotional suffering, to dissatisfaction, lack of fulfillment, even boredom, being unhappy just to experience the normal, as it were, atmosphere of our own mind when our usual distractions are taken away. And often in the Pali Canon, which is the closest we can get to the actual words of the Buddha, often we hear the Buddha saying, the reason I taught the Dharma is to solve the problem of dukkha, to solve the problem of dukkha. And he offered in particular the Four Noble Truths as a sort of doctor's diagnosis of the problem of dukkha, setting out what the problem is, the cause of that problem, whether there's a cure for that problem, and what that cure actually is. The prescription for the way the cure can be achieved. So Buddhism claims to get to the root of the problem of dukkha. And it claims to be able to tell us how that problem can be solved. And that is quite a claim. So as I've already said, the dukkha refers to a multitude of different expressions, if you like. And it's most intense. It's what sometimes I believe called dukkha, which means just the pain, the actual physical suffering that is an inescapable part of having a fragile mortal body. Life contains an inescapable element of dukkha. And there's been a lot of extra dukkha around in the last few weeks as a result of coronavirus and this pandemic. People suffering from an illness that can be very unpleasant and can even lead to death. So people lying in hospital beds suffering with COVID are experiencing a very real dose of dukkha. And speaking from where I am at the moment, I can't claim to have any experience of how the Dharma could deal with that. I find it very difficult to imagine how that can be anything other than a terrible experience. But the record of the days and weeks before the Buddha's death in the Pali Canon, the Parinirvana Sutta, shows us the Buddha suffering such terrible pain and illness, and taking all of that, taking that pain and illness and his approaching death, apparently completely in his stride, with great equanimity, far more concerned about other people and the future of the Sangha than he is about his own illness. So it would seem that taken far enough, if we make enough progress, the Dharma can even provide a solution to dukkha at that level, to dukkha, physical pain and suffering. But most of our dukkha is not physical. It's mental. It's all the things I mentioned earlier. It's the emotional suffering that we cause ourselves by our reactions to the world. It's our continual nagging dissatisfaction with the world and with ourselves, and with the way we're living. It's our lack of any deep feeling of fulfillment, any deep meaning in the way that we're living. And as I said, it's even the boredom we feel when our distractions are taken away, when we're forced to experience our own mind. And of course, it's very easy to see how the Dharma can help us with all of that. We've probably all have some experience. Well, I'm sure we all have some experience of how the Dharma can help us with dukkha at those levels. And that's what I'm going to focus on tonight. I'm not really going to try to tackle the problem of dukkha, but I'll try and tackle the more mental aspect of it. What does the Dharma tell us is the root of the problem of dukkha, and what does it tell us can be done about it? So the obvious place to start is the Buddha's doctor's prescription, if you like, the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha's pithy diagnosis of the problem. We all know the Four Noble Truths. We talk about it on the intermediate class, but it might help to unpack it a bit and look at the meaning. So the first truth, if you read the encyclopedia, it'll probably tell you that the Buddha's first noble truth is that life is suffering. That's often how that is understood by non-Buddhists, and it makes the Buddhist tradition sound pretty dour and life-denying. Sangharashta has sort of quipped about this, that people who think that the Buddha's first noble truth is that life is suffering are often very surprised by how cheerful Buddhists seem to be, and rather puzzled by that. So yeah, that's not the way we take it. If I was expressing the first noble truth, I or another Buddhist, one of the things we might say is that life contains an inescapable element of dukkha. We're all going to experience physical pain and illness, and we're all going to get old. And meanwhile, the world is just not going to always give us what we want. It's often going to give us what we don't want. There may be pleasure. There will be pleasure. There may be great joy and beauty and intimacy and wonderful things, but there will also be dukkha. This is just plain true. And knowing it and accepting it can help us to accept and deal with dukkha when it does come along, which it will. But maybe another way of expressing that first noble truth is to say that life as it is normally lived is, in fact, unsatisfactory. Life as it is normally lived is dukkha, in the sense of unsatisfying. Life as it is normally lived, focused on getting what we want, getting our own way, getting our likes and dislikes met, getting the pleasures that we like and avoiding the things we don't like, getting the possessions and the financial security that we want, getting other people's approval, getting all the things that our own small self wants. Living like that is always going to leave us disappointed and frustrated, and deep down feeling that we aren't living the life that we should be living, that our life lacks meaning and fulfillment, and that at some level we feel bad about ourselves. There will be a sort of higher self, a sort of potential of what we could be, poking us in the ribs, sort of, if you like, metaphorically poking us in the ribs, whispering in our ear that this isn't the way we should be living, this is beneath us, making us feel constantly uncomfortable. So that way of seeing the first noble truth, that life as it is normally lived is inherently unsatisfactory, would seem to be supported by the second noble truth, the Buddha's diagnosis of the problem, the cause of the problem. So he tells us that the cause of all this dissatisfaction is selfish craving, not desire, not all desire, because there are desires that are desirable. like desire for spiritual progress. If we didn't desire to grow, we wouldn't grow. Desire for spiritual progress, desire for meaning, desire for friendship and community, and so on. Very healthy desires, very positive desires. So not all desire, but craving for conditioned things that cannot satisfy us. We expect this transient, conditioned world, ephemeral world around us to somehow give us what we think will make us happy and fulfilled. But it can't give us those things, or not for long, and certainly not always. And even if the word by some miracle did deliver what we think will make us happy and fulfilled, in some sort of consistent and permanent way, the things that we think will make us happy and fulfilled won't make us happy and fulfilled anyway. Because living just for the usual things, like transient self-pleasure, sense pleasures, wealth, possessions, status, and so on, it's beneath us. We're better than that. Or we could be. We're bigger beings than that, or we could be. There is nothing wrong with those things in themselves. But making our life about them, placing our heart on them, setting our heart on them will make our life dukkha. The Buddha described a life looking for happiness in this way as the ignoble quest. Because there's something ignoble and small and even a little bit ugly about making our life about just those things, making our life about just those things. And living that way will always leave us feeling that we're letting ourselves down, wasting our precious life. The higher self, or the self we could be, our potential will always be there, poking us in the ribs, whispering in our ear, making us feel bored or anxious or just plain unhappy and unfulfilled. And if we live like that, actually, we won't even enjoy the passing pleasures and the transient beauty of the conditioned world in the way that we could. If only we felt more at peace with ourselves, more in tune with ourselves. Because we'll always have this nagging sense of dissatisfaction or be there underlying anything that we could enjoy. So the Buddha contrasted this ignoble quest for happiness from conditioned things that just can't deliver it and that are beneath us. He contrasted that with what he called the noble quest, the Arya Pariyesana, which is about living for something higher, setting our heart on and seeking something higher and more beautiful and more transcendental, which at the moment maybe we can only get a vague intuitive sense of, but which we know is there. We know it's there, and which we can move towards. So in the third noble truth, the Buddha tells us that there is a cure for dukkha, which is to stop living life as it is normally lived, with our hearts set on the ignoble quest, and instead to set our heart on something higher and to begin living the noble quest. And the fourth truth tells us how to do that. It tells us that the way to do that is to follow the Eightfold Path, which involves looking at life through new eyes to start with, and then letting that higher vision affect our emotions, affect the way we speak, the way we act, the way we earn our livelihood, where we put our effort, how we pay attention, and how we meditate. The mental state, it will result in mental states that are beyond what we could normally achieve. So the Eightfold Path is a prescription for bringing the way we see the world more in line with the noble quest. and then expressing that more and more fully in our life, so that our life, our whole life and our whole being begins to express that noble higher being that we could become. So that over time we grow to become more and more fully like that noble being, to be more and more fully that noble being, the being we could become. Okay, well, if we're experiencing a lot of dukkha right now, and if the situation we find ourselves in seems very difficult, then all of this about the root causes of dukkha and growing towards a higher being may sound all very abstract and long-term. We probably want, well, we all want a way to handle dukkha right now, a way to transform difficult situations right now. So you may be thinking, yeah, Vadanya, yeah. If I practice the Dharma for ages, give up loads of things that I enjoy, follow the Eightfold Path for ages, one day I'll be free of a lot of the dukkha I feel. Well, what about right now? So actually, I think that changing what we set our heart on, switching our goal from the ignoble quest to the noble quest does transform difficult situations right now. We don't have to wait until we're almost enlightened to free ourselves of quite a lot of the dukkha that we create for ourselves. So we see a situation as bad or difficult and then cause ourselves dukkha about it because it isn't giving what we want. It's giving us what we want, or it's giving us what we don't want. It's giving us discomfort rather than pleasure, either physically or emotionally. We're losing rather than gaining, or we're losing rather than winning. We're not getting our own way. People are blaming us rather than thinking we're wonderful. And we think that's terrible. And it causes us pain. It causes us dukkha. If our heart is set on the ignoble quest, if we see our well-being and our happiness as depending on things like physical pleasures, possessions, security, approval, then any situation that threatens those seems bad in inverted commas. It shouldn't be happening. And our mental response to that causes us dukkha. That sort of, our mental response to that is dukkha. But if our heart is set on a noble quest, if what's really important to us is being more like the higher being we could become, then this sort of thing really isn't that important. In fact, situations that we might usually think of as difficult or bad can even perhaps become welcome because they give us a chance to flex our spiritual muscles, to show what we're made of. So as long as we're not experiencing actual physical harm, well, desirable and undesirable, good and bad, those applied to situations, well, they're just labels. They're just labels. They just depend on the stories we're telling ourselves. Tell ourselves a different story. What's good becomes bad. What's bad becomes good. And by changing the labels we put on what is happening, we can, at a stroke, do away with a lot of our unnecessary dukkha. The dukkha that we create for ourselves by not accepting the way the world is bound to be. So another way of looking at that could be to say that changing what we go to refuge for can do away with a lot of our dukkha. What we go for refuge to is what we place our heart on. What we see our life as being all about. Yeah, I like the phrase, what we place our heart on. What do we place our heart on? Where do we look for fulfillment and happiness? And we all go for refuge to something. It might be pleasure. It might be money and possessions. It might be career, achievement, success, popularity. And when we go for, and those things are all, so when what we go for refuge to is threatened, we feel pain, we feel dukkha. We create mental dukkha for ourselves. And things like pleasure and money and success and career, they are all extremely unreliable, fickle, completely at the mercy of circumstances. So as long as we go for refuge to them, plenty of dukkha, plenty of dukkha. Whereas what makes someone a Buddhist is going for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And because Buddha and Dharma and Sangha are reliable, they're in a sense above and beyond worldly happenings. To that extent, we will be free from a lot of our dukkha because our refuges cannot be threatened in the way that worldly refuges can be threatened. So this phrase, going for refuge to the three jewels, I mean, I must admit that for ages I thought, going for refuge to the three jewels, I really don't relate to that as a term. It's a bit of Buddhist jargon. It's a bit of Buddhist jargon that not everyone relates to. Even, I know order members who don't relate to it. So if that's you, if you don't really relate to that phrase, going for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I'd like to try to give you a bit of a sense of what it means, at least to me, in terms of our immediate behavior right now, in terms of what it does to our immediate behavior right now. It means other things as well. It means much more long-term aims. But right now, I could say that going for refuge to the Buddha means choosing to be the bigger being we could be, the bigger being I could be right now, to the extent that I'm able to express that in the way I am right now, choosing to act out of the best of ourselves, not what is lower right now. And going for refuge to the Dharma, well, it's a lot of help in doing that. It gives us, when we're sort of not quite in touch with that, well, it sort of gives us a guide, kindness, generosity, simplicity, honesty, awareness. It gives us a guide to that. It keeps us in touch with it. And then going for refuge to the Sangha means doing all that not just for our own sake, not even for the sake of getting beyond our dukkha, but for the sake of something transpersonal that is manifesting in our world through the Sangha. And being part of that something, and if possible, serving that something. And that aspect, I think, is crucial because it means going beyond the self. It means being about something bigger and wider and higher than ourselves, orientating our life around that something. And that something is something transpersonal, something suprapersonal. It doesn't belong to you or me. So when we do that, we go beyond the self. And going completely beyond the self would be the complete solution to the problem of dukkha. We don't have the full experience of going beyond the self. And frankly, in Western Buddhism, there's quite a lot of nonsense talked about it. I mean, it's often seen as a sort of something that can be achieved by a sort of cognitive insight that you can get in meditation alone. And I'm afraid I've known people who claimed to have insight into non-self whom it seemed to have really increased their ego, puzzlingly. So it's not just about something that we can achieve in a short meditation experience. Vision is just the first stage of the Noble Eightfold Path. The whole Noble Eightfold Path is about how we then manifest that, how we let that soak into our whole being, change our whole being, and it's our whole being has to change. Our whole being has to change to go completely beyond self. Being about self is pretty firmly built into us. It involves a lot more than just some sort of passing experience in meditation, which may not have that deep an effect unless we pursue it, unless we follow the path of transformation as well as the path of vision. So we don't have that full experience of going beyond self yet. And we may not have that full experience for some time yet. But we can have it at what Sangharakshita calls the effective level. So those of you who've been around for a while be familiar with this idea that Sangharakshita talks about various spiritual progress being possible at several different levels. There's a provisional level at which, when we're inspired, we're in touch with something quite beyond ourselves, but that doesn't affect most of our life. The rest of our life is sort of lived differently. And then there's the real level, which is what we've been talking about, sort of total transformation, if you like. But between those two levels, there's what he calls the effective level. And that is the level at which some sort of spiritual growth, some sort of spiritual, I hate the word attainment, has a real effect. It's effective. It changes the way we live, and it changes the way we think, and it changes the way we feel. And we can go beyond the self at the effective level. The level at which it has a real effect on how we live and think and feel. So what that means, I think, going beyond the self at the effective level is really deeply seeing how much we depend on others, how much we owe all our benefits to others. We could not survive without others. We could take it beyond that and talk about how we're connected to our environment, and we're connected perhaps to the universe in ways that we're not yet aware of, that maybe have to do with the nature of reality, and that our very idea of separateness is a delusion, that separateness in time and space maybe is a delusion. But at a very ordinary, down-to-earth level, we depend on others. We owe others for all the benefits that we experience. We just couldn't live without others. We're part of this web of mutual benefit. And if we're a Buddhist, part of that is to see how much we depend and owe to the Sangha. We'd be nowhere. None of us would be practitioners. None of us would get anywhere. We are totally part of the nature of this anatman that we talk about, this lack of self-nature, is that we are completely embedded until we're very, very far advanced. We're embedded in our environment. Our environment has a huge effect on us. And without the Sangha, we're not, that's our environment. That's the environment we need to grow. We're not going anywhere without it. So we depend on the Sangha, and we've got, of course, good friends in the Sangha who do things for us. People have devoted their lives to creating the Sangha, to creating Buddhist centers, etc. So how much do we owe the Sangha? And seeing that at any sort of deep level manifests as gratitude. It's what metta, when metta comes in touch with seeing the benefits we've received, we get gratitude. So gratitude, and if you like, its manifestation, a desire to serve, a desire to be part of that benefit, that web of benefits. And going beyond self in that way would mean a very real liberation from our small self, a very real liberation from the dukkha that we experience when our small self does not get its way, which is a lot of the time. And there's a very simple practice that we can do to move towards that liberation, which is something that we actually do on our introductory classes, which is simply, excuse me, got you back, which is simply to think of, reflect on the benefits we receive from others, the benefits we have received from others. As I say, we do this in our introductory class and intermediate class, and we sort of emphasize that in doing that, you cannot force yourself to feel gratitude. We can't force ourselves to feel anything. That just is not going to work. In fact, it just promotes resistance. And the Buddhist word for gratitude, katanyata, actually means recognition of benefits received. So we can recognize the benefits that we've received. Very often we're just completely unaware of it. I mean, when people do this exercise, they think, well, all of these people who benefited me in some way or another, people throughout my childhood, those teachers, that person, that person, that person, I've completely forgotten them. I've completely forgotten it. And when we call it to mind, the feeling is can be quite almost overwhelming, the feeling of gratitude which arises. So that's a very, very small practice. It's a very simple practice that we could do regularly, which I believe would really put us in touch. It would be an insight practice. It would be an insight practice because it would put us in touch with just how dependent, contingent, interrelated we are with others. And when we do that, we would move beyond self. We would move beyond self. We would have this desire to be, in a way, serving something larger than ourselves, which manifests as our Sangha. And it would be, to a very large extent, much more free of dukkha than we are when we're just focused on getting what our small self wants